What is good, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm just outside the casino in the car park. I'm reading my strategy sheet here, which I've made to try and improve my game. It's 25 pages long, just adding condensed, succinct concepts to it. Hopefully it helps us progress. But yeah, I've actually just come from a steakhouse, and as I'm reading this, I am falling asleep. Might go for a quick 20-minute power nap. Feel refreshed. All right, man, we did not get any sleep. We're just gonna go play. I think we're gonna be all right. See you there. Absolute roller coaster of a session, this one at Aspers Casino in London. We buy in for £264 at our regular 1-2 table, giving us around 130 big blinds to play with. Things start off well as we are dealt the beautiful ace and king of spades in the low jack. Action folds to me and I put in my standard raise of £7, hoping to get some action here. The button and small blind duly oblige as the button flats. Small blind puts in this squeeze to £29. Action's back on us and we decide to fast play our hand and 4-bet to 75 quid. The button quickly gets out of the way and the small blind decides to fold, giving us a healthy £36 profit to start the session. Unfortunately, things don't continue in the same vein and we lose a few small pots with King 10, King Queen and a couple of others where we completely miss the board and end up check folding to our opponents. The next interesting hand comes in when we are dealt 7-6 of hearts in the big blind. The hijack raises to £7, the button calls and I call as well, hoping for some red cards. The dealer answers our prayers and slides out a flop of ace 5-4 all of hearts, giving us a flopped flush with a redraw to the straight flush. We check in flow to the hijack who makes a half pot bet of £10. The button calls and we decide to slow play by calling as well. In hindsight, maybe I could have raised in this spot to get value from hijack's ace-x combos and big pairs with a heart, but mixing in some calls for deception is fine as well. I think I check in the dark as there are no cards that I would consider leading. I'm hoping that one or both these players see this as a weakness and decide to continue barreling. Unfortunately, the hijack checks, but the button does make a bet of £20, around 40% pot. Having slow played the flop, I feel like now is the time to unleash my trap and I make a raise to £60. Hijack folds and the button makes the call. The river is a safeguard for our hand, the jack of spades. We avoid any board pairing and feel confident our flush is likely best, and with around £170 in the pot, I make a bet of £130, hoping to get called by a set or two pair. The button calls and I turn my hand over ready to claim the pot, but he turns over 10-8 of hearts for a bigger flush. We end up losing £207 in total in that hand. I don't think there's a lot we could have done to avoid losing the big pot here, as flush under flush is always going to be a costly hand. Maybe we could have sized down the river a bet to avoid losing as much, but I wanted to look bluffy, and betting smaller opens up the possibility of him raising with his hand, putting us in an even worse position. Despite that setback, we get back on the horse and add an additional £190, meaning we are now in for £454. I take a short break to regain my composure before heading back to the table. We win and lose a couple of small pots before we are dealt another premium hand. I look down at ace queen off in the low jack and face a raise of just £5 from early position. Usually we'd expect to see much larger raises in live poker, so I'm not sure what his small raise means. My initial reading of this player is that he's a young recreational player who's quite passive, so a small raise doesn't indicate a lot of strength to me. We decide to bump it up to 15 with our ace queen. The small blind makes the call, as does the early position raiser. 3 ways to the flop, which comes 9-2-4, 2 hearts, giving us absolutely nothing at all. However, on such a disconnected board, we retain a range advantage with all our overpairs, so we decide to make a roughly third pot c-bet of £15. Small blind gets out of the way and the early position player calls. The turn is the nine of spades. Early position checks and we have a decision with our ace queen. Our read is that he likely has a weak hand, probably a small pocket pair or maybe a couple of Broadway combos, so we decide to bet again, this time £35. The early position player calls again, and now we see an interesting river, the king of hearts, completing the flush. We should have more king x hands in our range than the early position player, but the flush completing is a little scary considering how many 2 heart hand combos make up his range at this point. We debate going for a third barrel on the river, but ultimately I decide against it, checking back and hoping to win against a worse ace high hand. and early position turns over pocket 10s to take down the pot. Looking back, I think triple barreling would have got the job done, but instead I pussied out. We live and learn. Not the best of starts to the session. We add on an extra £100 to top up our stack and lose a couple more small pots with ace jack 7-7 before being dealt ace 4 of hearts in the small blind. Looking back, this is a hand I may have messed up, but want to include in the blog to hold myself accountable. The action falls to the cutoff, who makes a £7 raise, and we decide to free bet to £27, putting the pressure back on our opponent and making it easier to play our hand out of position. The cutoff calls and we see a flop of king jack 3, all of clubs. Monotone boards are always hard to play in free bet pots, but given how good the king and jack are for our range, I feel like we should have put out a c bet to get folds from his small pairs and better ace x hands without a club. However, we decide to check, and when our opponent bets 35, we have no choice but to fold. After missing out on a potential c bet, we are given a reprieve by the poker gods as we look down at the most beautiful sight in poker, pocket aces. Action folds to me in the low jack. I raise to £7, hoping to get free bet so I can shovel more money into the pot. However, the hijack calls, as does the button and big blind, so we go 4 ways to the flop. Not exactly what you want to see in a single raise pot with pocket aces, but when the board comes out, ace 9 5 2 diamonds, we are suddenly feeling a lot better about our situation. With the ace of diamonds in our hand, I feel like I have this board pretty much locked up, so I decided to check for deception and let one of my opponents take a stab at it. The hijack takes us up on that offer by betting £15, and the other players get out of the way, and we decide to smooth call and see a turn, which comes to 8 of hearts. I check again, and the hijack double barrels, this time for £25. He doesn't have much left behind, so raising is certainly an option, but to keep his bluffs in, I decide to just call once more. Now the jack of clubs comes on the river. I start to worry that he'll check back some of his one pair hands, so I lead out for £31, putting him all in. He snap calls, showing ace 8 off for 2 pair. I table my top set to rake in a nice pot. Unlucky for him there. Let's go. A couple small pots go by with nothing interesting happening before we are dealt queen 10 of hearts in the +2 position. I raise to £7 and face a small free bet from the cutoff. Getting such a great price with a suited hand, I flick in the call and we see a flop of ace 4 3 2 spades. Not a great flop for our hand considering the amount of ace x combos in our opponent's range, but the backdoor straight and flush draws gives us a little something to work with. The flop checks through anyway and we hit the 10 of clubs on the turn, giving us second pair. Given that we've just picked up showdown value, there's no need to bet, but in the moment I bet half pot for value after he checked back the flop. I thought maybe I could get some value from draws or lower pocket pairs, and the cutoff does make the call. The river is the queen of spades, giving us 2 pair. And likely the best hand. Well, we do still need to be a little concerned about better 2 pairs or maybe even a rivered straight or flush. I decided to bet out for £50 to get value from Villain's 1 pair type holdings. Villain does make the call and then turns over pocket aces for top set. Just as it's looking like one of those sessions where nothing goes right, we pick up ace jack of diamonds in the big blind. Under the gun limps, low jack raises to 10, 2 players call, and we decide to bump it up to 60 quid, trying to take down the pot without seeing a flop. It looks like we are about to just do that until the button decides to keep us honest and make the call. Flop comes 8 8 7 rainbow. Not the best flop for us, but we do have some backdoors that could make things interesting on later streets. We decide to make a c bet of £50, hoping to put pressure on low pocket pairs and potentially get some value from straight draws, but the button makes the call and we see the queen of clubs hit the turn. This card should be better for our range than his, and to be honest, I was tilting pretty hard after the aces hand, so I decided to ship it in his face for £84 effective. At this point, I'm praying for a fold to keep the session alive, and eventually mucks his hand.
How are you not dead? I have no idea!
Giving us a tidy profit on our aggressive play. After picking up that nice pot, we pick up a few more pots with some well-timed aggression, getting bluffs through with ace queen, 4-4, and even 4-2 of hearts. Shortly after, we pick up the sailboats again in the small blind, face a limp from the cutoff. We decide to bump it up to £10, trying to juice the pot for when we flop a set. Unfortunately, the flop is pretty terrible for our hand, King 10-6 rainbow. We decide to check and the cutoff checks back. The turn is the Jack of Hearts, and I start to think that the only way I'll win this pot is with aggression, so I make a delayed c-bet of £7. The cutoff calls and we see the 3 of diamonds hit the river, so close to rivering the set despite only having a pair of 4s. We continue with our planned aggression, making a pot size bet of 35. The cutoff thinks about it but decide to let it go, giving us a nice pot to keep us chipping up. A couple of hands later, we are dealt ace king suited in the big blind and throw in a free bet to £30 after the small blind raised to £10. We flop a gutter and a backdoor flush draw and c-bet half pot, which the small blind calls. We turn top pair and decide to slow play by checking back to extract value on the river. The river is a complete brick to 4 diamonds and we bet £55 trying to make it look like a bluff. Unfortunately, the small blind doesn't fall for it and finds a fold. The hot run of cards continues as we are dealt ace queen off on the button. We make it 10 to go after the cut off limps and go 3 ways to the flop after the big blind and cut off call. The flop comes ace 4-2 rainbow, giving us top pair with a great kicker. Given how dry the board is, I decide to check back and hope that our opponents catch a pair on the turn. The turn isn't a great one. The 5 of spades puts a 4-liner to a straight and brings in a flush draw, but we should still have the best hand overall. Everyone checks to me, so now I think it's time to make a delayed c-bet for £15. The big blind folds, the cutoff calls, and we go to a river, which is the Jack of Clubs. We should still have the best hand most of the time, so I go for value and bet £30. We are hoping for the cutoff to just flick in the call, but instead he counts out a raise to £75. A very small raise though, that may be trying to look like a milky bet, so to aid my decision, I do look over at him, trying to pick up a live read, and I noticed that he's tensed up as I did this, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I think that he is ultimately full of shit, so I decide to make the call, and he turns over the 2 of hearts and then mucks his hand, giving us a nice profit of £110. Let's flipping go.
I think it's 3.
Just as we think things can't get any better, we get dealt pocket rockets in the cutoff with a straddle in play. I make a standard raise to £15. However, we get a walk and win £8. We are down to 6-handed now and we are dealt ace 8 of diamonds in the hijack. I make my standard raise to £7 and get called by both blinds. The flop is an interesting one. 10, 10, 7, 2 diamonds, giving us the nut flush draw. Both players check. We make a small c-bet of £10 and only the big blind calls. Given how many draws are on this board, I'd expect big blind to raise a decent amount of their 10x combos, so I think their range is pretty weak in this spot. The turn is the brickiest of bricks you could imagine. The 2 of clubs, big blind checks and we follow through with our read that they are weak and semi bluff for £30. The big blind releases the hand and I pat myself for getting a decent bluff through. A couple of hands later, I'm dealt queen jack off on the button and face a £7 raise from the hijack. I decide to see a flop in position and just call. The big blind joins us as 3 players go to the flop of Jack 7, 8, 2 spades. We flop top pair on one of the wettest boards you can imagine and face a £10 bet from the hijack. We want to charge flush draws and pair plus straight draw hands, so we raise it up to £30 and the hijack calls and we see probably the best card in the deck, the Jack of Clubs. Hijack checks and we continue for £40, looking to get some value from villain's pair plus draw type hands. They make the call and the river is the 2 of spades, completing the flush draw from the flop. Rather than checking, the villain leads out for £85, putting us in a tricky position. Given that we don't have a spade and flushes are a decent part of villain's range, we decide to make the discipline laydown and get shown the 10-6 of spades for rivered flush from our opponent. Despite losing the hand, we did well to save ourselves the £85 bet on the river and we move.
Okay, I have to show everyone. That's the rules. That's the rules. I folded a jack, man.
We lose a couple of small hands and get dealt another ace 8 hand, this time in spades, the cutoff and small blind limp, and I raise to £12 in the big blind, looking to build a pot and punish their weaker ranges. The flop comes queen 10, 3, 2 hearts, a swing and a miss, the action checks through, and the 9 of spades hits the turn. turn. We face a £10 bet and with our gut shot decide to make a spicy play by raising to £30. Unfortunately, the villain quickly clicks it back to 60, leaving us with no option then to fold. As I fold, he says he had King Jack for the turn nuts. Unlucky for us to run into it, but we move forward. As the session is drawing to a close, we get involved in what is quite possibly the craziest hand I've personally ever witnessed in person, let alone played in. We peel the Cowboys and raise to £7 with just under 150 big blinds behind, and then face a free bet to £30 from the hijack who covers us.
It's a large raise.
7 to 30.
In position, I guess is large now. But anyway.
It is literally hijack's first hand at the table after taking his seat, but I'm not gonna be so welcoming with a hand as strong as ours. We want to get as much money into the middle as possible, and after acting as though I'm just gonna slide in a call, we unleash the 4-bet to £100, and our opponent has some words for us.
The acting is really good, but it doesn't really work here.
Oh, good.
Doyle Brunson says the key to no limit is to put a man to a decision for all his chips. Teddy's just done it. He's representing aces, the only hand better than my Cowboys.
Despite it feeling so much like aces and him goading me into a call, I close my eyes, I put in the rest of my stack and run it out.
I think you might do.
Even if he's got aces, he's losing.
And we're good for a roughly £550 pot. However, villain does something unexpected. After repeatedly saying that pocket aces would have lost to him, he turns over 3 deuce. Oh, thank God for the king on the flop. Otherwise, I would have been felted by fucking 3 deuce off. Poker's a strange game sometimes, no doubt about it. Wow. After that excitement, there's only one hand of note left to cover. We raise ace-5 of diamonds to £10 after a limp from the cutoff and go heads up to a flop of ace-2 king rainbow. Villain checks and we c-bet third pot to £6 and get a call. The 9 of hearts hits the turn and we double barrel, this time for 20 and get called. Given the action, I'm pretty sure that he has an ace, so when the 9 of spades hits the river, we're very likely to be chopping. However, I'm here to win, not to chop, so I turn my ace-5 into a bluff and triple barrel 60 on the river. Villain eventually finds a fold and we scoop a nice pot to end the night. What a crazy end to the session. In total, I was in for £495 and cashed out for £565 for a total profit of 70 quid. Not the biggest winning session, but things are moving in the right direction. Let's hope to continue this momentum next time. It's 4 AM now. Guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate every single one of you for watching and hope you're enjoying the content and the journey. I'm signing out. Peace.